Yeah, so most people in the world are operating under the false impression that there are too many people. And the birth rate has been dropping like crazy. But last year, if you take the number of children born times the life expectancy, which is 85 years, it's very impressive life expectancy, then Japan would have, I think, around 68 million people, roughly half of the current population. I mean, I don't think we should try to have people live for a very long time, It would cause ossification of society, because the truth is, most people don't change their mind, they just die.
I wanted to include those clips from Elon Musk because there is a huge amount to unpack. Some I agree with, some I do not. I don't want anyone to accuse me of taking what he has said out of context. The full interview is 45 minutes long. As with all my scientific literature, I will include a link to the full interview by Welt in the description below. People are living longer. That is undeniable. From the 1850s, advances in medical science have continued to improve, and with it, the length of time for which we live. Barring the occasional pandemic or war, this trend has only been going up. At the time of making this video, the global life expectancy sits at 73.5 years. Life expectancy for women is higher than men, sitting at 76 years and 70.8 years respectively. If we look at the more affluent countries, that figure only rises. In Japan, for instance, the life expectancy is just shy of 85 years, as Elon said. However, this figure does not tell the full story. People have this idea that we are just living longer, that a 70-year-old now is the same as a 40-year-old from 200 years ago, and that's simply not the case. If you went back a few hundred years, then around 40% of newborns were not expected to make it to their first birthday. In fact, if you were a wealthy Roman living 2,000 years ago and you made it to adulthood, then there was a pretty good chance you would make it to what we consider now old age. Marcus Antonius Gordianus was born in 157 AD. He became emperor at 81. Marcus Claudius Tacitus lived to 76. Antoninus Pius lived to 74, and Vespasian lived until he was 70. Tomie Gozen, an Unabusha, a female samurai from the 12th century, was reported to live into her 90s. Humans have always had the capacity to live to these ages. Most of modern medicine has been focused on stopping premature deaths, so people can live to these ripe old ages. But we've done little to prolong the lifespan that nature has afforded us. What this has done is create an upside down demographic that we've never experienced before. The proportion of older people to younger people has never been this great, and it's only going to increase moving forward. When the retirement age was first introduced, it was under the assumption that most people would, at most, only have a few years left to live. So it was agreed upon that those who had spent their life working for our society should get to enjoy their last few years in comfort. But those last few years have stretched into decades. As I've said already, medicine has mostly been focused on increasing one's lifespan, not necessarily their health span. Those people are no longer contributing, and please do not understand what I'm trying to say. I don't believe a person's self-worth is defined by what they can contribute. But that's how society views us. I worked as a carer whilst I was pursuing my master's degree. I would drive to service users' homes and assist them. It was a job that paid less than minimum wage. About 40% of my time was spent driving from one person to the next, time I did not get paid for. It was only for the 15 or 30-minute appointments when I was actively seeing a patient. Whilst pursuing my education, I was working 40-hour weeks, fitting it around my studies as best as I could, and I was actively losing money the whole time, eating away at my paltry savings. That's how valuable this kind of work is seen as. It's why you get so few good carers, because you can't make a career out of it. Most do it for a short stint. Those that are forced to do it long term tend to lose all the compassion they have because they can't even care for themselves. I would say about 80% of the carers I saw just didn't care anymore. They lost the capacity to. I kept it up for 18 months, and I deeply cared for those that I looked after. But I don't know how much longer I could have continued without suffering compassion fatigue and burnout. What that experience reinforced to me was how little our society values not just the working class, but also the elderly. When people tell me they don't want to live forever, I want to pull them into my brain and show them these memories so they can see what really awaits them. I want to tell you the story of one of these people. For anonymity reasons, we shall call him Mr. Smith. I saw Mr. Smith for about a year. For the last 6 months of his life, he had a DNR in place, or a DNA CPR if you want to be fancy, which stands for Do Not Attempt Cardiopulmonary Resuscitation, as it would be unlikely to result in success. This was a man that used to be in the military, 6'4", strong and proud, now in his late 80s. To even be able to afford the care and also to prevent falls, he had to sell his house and move into a bungalow. That house was brought up by a property mogul, so none of his family will see it. Not that they seem to be in his life much anyway. He was a widower and he lived alone. The social interaction he got from his carers was basically the only interaction he got, and that was only for brief stints, so I did become friends with him. But for the last 6 months of his life, I saw him deteriorate. His mind went. Half the time he couldn't recognize who I was. So often he wasn't even aware of his condition, so when I would go to see him, I would find him lying on the floor having hurt himself. Normally you're meant to call paramedics. We're not allowed to lift him up for legal reasons. That would have meant that he would have been lying on the floor upwards of 12 hours in some cases, just so that the right person with the right qualifications could do the job. So yeah, I broke the rules many times to help him, and I'm not ashamed of that. Mr. Smith was as much my friend as my client. As his condition got worse, he needed 2 carers, but he couldn't afford it. The equipment we had for him helped these solo visits, but it wasn't enough. Trying to move this gangly 6'4" guy was a mission for a single person, and there was no legal reason that we should have even been doing that. But what was the alternative? Just leave him. So we were told by our bosses to do our best, and that's what we did. The time we were given wasn't enough, so I was always running late to another appointment. When I had him in the mornings as my first call, I would get up early and make sure I was there so that he could get the assistance he needed. It was the only way I could be with him for longer than 30 minutes, and he needed longer than 30 minutes. It got to the point where he couldn't stand anymore. You would have to roll him to one side and do your best to clean him. You would try to feed him, but he wouldn't eat. He couldn't keep anything down. He became more skeletal with each passing day. This once strong soldier reduced to a ghoulish form, clasping at the covers for warmth. He would get bed sores, and no amount of moving him around and applying cream or bandages was going to change that. You would change his pads every day, and the stench of urine and feces was ghastly. Trying not to gag, even through the mask, was almost impossible. One day I went in to see him in the morning, feed him and clean him as I normally would. I tried to talk to him, but there was nothing there to talk to. I had him again that evening, the last call of the night. It was dark by the time I got there. Winter, probably around December. I saw him sleeping in bed, so I went to wake him up. Do my usual routine. I touched his hand and it was cold. I touched his cheek and it was cold. I felt his radial pulse and it was absent. Mr. Smith died on a Sunday evening, alone and emaciated after 6 months of suffering, lying in a pad full of his own filth. I used to be 100% against euthanasia. I had this optimism that there was always a chance people could get better, but in a situation like that, it would have been a mercy. When our body starts to shut down from old age, there is no cure, not right now. That's the reality that faces the overwhelming majority of us. None of this bullshit you see in heart-jerking movies. Someone passing away surrounded by their loved ones, crying over the person that they lost. The people that get that in their final moments, they're the lucky ones. most of us are not so lucky. That's how our society treats people who can't contribute anymore, as disposable. Our society just waits for them to die. A more totalitarian government would probably just kill them. They wouldn't mince their words. They're a burden to the rest of us. If you want to tell me that that is the natural order of things, and that is okay, I'm sorry, but you are so wrong. Those experiences taught me that we needed to do something about this. Because if that's what's waiting for me at the end of my life, I'm not going to lie to you, I'm terrified of it. Our world is fundamentally broken. Mahatma Gandhi once said that the true measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable. For most of us, you only need to go outside to see that. Homeless people on the street, who need support and often psychological help to get them back on their feet. What do we do instead? We place spikes outside shops so they are not an eyesight to the rest of us. Out of sight, out of mind. The sheer amount of elderly people I've seen come to the hospital with pneumonia because they can't afford to put their heating on. This is not the way things should be. Longevity is a solution to what I've seen. It's not the best solution, but it's something. If artificial intelligence really is going to replace so much of the work out there, then I do not understand why the benefits of those machines do not get distributed to the people whose jobs are being displaced rather than being funneled to the 1%. The people at the top have no idea of the suffering that's going on beneath them. But if we can keep people young, at the very least, they will not require others' help just to live day to day. Not to mention all the money spent on geriatric medicine and care, the savings globally would be in the trillions. And the quality of life for those individuals would be infinitely better. Now, another huge argument I see against longevity research is the fear that it will only go to the ultra-rich billionaires. You would create an entirely new class of people that never die. That is a fear I have too, but realistically it makes no sense. With the amount of money being spent on keeping these people going, it would be economic suicide not to implement these treatments for everyone. You would get your most skilled workers back. You would no longer have to task the younger generations with looking after them because they would be able to look after themselves. You would save so much money on care and medicine that could be put to better use. The treatments would pay for themselves. The real fear I have is not it going only to billionaires, but it being charged at extortionate rates, not because it costs that much for the treatment, but because pharmaceutical companies can charge that much. Yes, you can have life extension therapy, but it's going to put you in so much debt that you have to keep working that dead-end job. If you're lucky, you might have a few months debt-free before you need renewal. That would be a dystopian nightmare. One that would be wholly unnecessary and predicated on politicians and the elite not being incompetent and greedy, which they do tend to be. That is a real fear I have. But it's not a good enough one not to pursue this and then do everything in our power to make sure that kind of policy does not get implemented. The current demographic changes leading to this silver tsunami is only going to get worse. It's why the recent discovery of oocyte stem cells gives me so much hope. I'm not a woman, if my voice didn't give that away, but I have oodles of empathy. And when I see the fear these people have, it breaks my fucking heart. I want to find a way to remove the sword of Damocles hanging over their head. There are so many problems in the world, far too much for one person, but if there's one thing that my research has shown, is that it's possible to remove that biological clock and at least give them one less thing to worry about. Ovarian stem cells have been theorized for close to a century. Studies in the 1920s showed that there may well be a way for oogenesis to occur postnatally, but then Sir Solomon Zuckerman came along and concluded that there was no experimental or histological evidence to support the view that oogenesis could continue after puberty, despite the fact that there actually was. This dogma was accepted and rarely challenged. Ovarian stem cells do exist. Research has already shown that they can give rise to oocytes in culture and produce healthy oocytes in vivo. Having children later is becoming a necessary step in our culture. If we're already considering living for hundreds of years, then let's expand all aspects of our life. Let's reverse menopause so having a child at 100 is not only possible, but the norm. Let us give people the time to figure out themselves and the world, rather than expecting them to have children when they are still children themselves. In South Korea, the fertility rate is currently 0.84 births per woman. In 50 years' time, if trends carry on this way, the numbers of people in South Korea is going to be half what it is today. Population collapse is going to occur, and there's going to be barely any young people to look after their elders. And there's no incentive for young people today to have children because they're already living in box rooms, working themselves to the bone just to try and get ahead, whilst their bosses jangle the false carrot of progression in front of their faces. And the thing is, they have no option but to chase after it. There's no alternative for them. So how on earth does telling people that they are failures for not fulfilling their obligations going to help anything? Low fertility rates is a symptom of a problem, not the problem itself. Economists and the like browbeating people for not behaving as they want them to? Why? So they no longer have fresh meat for the corporate grinder. It's only going to accomplish one thing: mess with people's mental health even more, leading more people to opt out of society and more suicides. Between 2015 and 2018, 13.2% of Americans reported taking antidepressants just in the past 30 days from when that questionnaire was made. That number has risen significantly since then. If you look at a person's whole life, in some places, more than 50% of the population will be on antidepressants at one point or another. A disease is defined as a condition of a living animal or plant body, or one of its parts that impairs normal functioning and is typically manifested by distinguishing signs and symptoms. You're meant to give someone an antidepressant when their mental state is quote-unquote not normal. When over half of the population supposedly have defective minds, you have to start questioning that criteria. When half the population is on mental health medication, that's not a sign of a sick brain but a sick society. But that's what it demands. Take your pills and keep on plugging along. To quote Tom York, you become a pig in a cage on antibiotics. Because it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And the thing is, those politicians in power don't have an answer. They don't have a bloody clue. So they don't even bother trying. That fertility problem in South Korea, they throw their hands up and say, fuck it, I'll be long dead by then, so it's not my problem. Our lives are so short that we don't even consider what could happen 50 years from now because it's not our problem. That needs to change. People need to be held accountable in this life for their actions. Critics of longevity will say that it leads to overpopulation, but right now we are facing the opposite. If you look at almost any statistical model of populations in an enclosed system, you will see an exponential growth phase, followed by a brief stationary phase, before you hit the death phase. You see this in microbes, you see this in nature, between predator and prey populations constantly oscillating. A population quickly rises due to an abundance of resources. Those abundant resources lead to an overproduction of new organisms. When you reach that stationary phase, the number of organisms exceeds the available number of resources. That's why we get this death phase. There's not enough to go around. This cycle keeps ecosystems in check, but human populations are far more complex because we're experiencing this upside down demographic, something which does not occur in nature. Humanity is reaching the end of this exponential growth phase that we've been experiencing for the last century, and we are reaching it far sooner than many predicted. Our limiting resources are not due to a lack of availability to them, but because of the unequal distribution of them. The world has enough for everyone's need. It does not have enough for everyone's greed. The rich are richer now than perhaps they've ever been. the poor are poorer, and the middle class is rapidly shrinking. Longevity won't cause an overpopulation issue. In fact, right now, it's the only solution I see to avoiding the population collapse of the future and solving the very crisis that Mr. Musk believes is the greatest threat to humanity. So with that, I have to question why he is so uninterested in longevity research. He believes that it will lead to ossification of society. I don't believe that. Not even a little bit. Yes, old people can be set in their ways. It's why you have the phrase, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. But people don't need to die for them to learn new skills. In Range, Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialist World, a book by David Epstein, he explores how people who do not hyper-specialize early in life have more success throughout their life course. They tend to be more creative and able to make connections that more of their specialized peers cannot see. It's why you see these chess prodigies at 10 not able to transition to anything else when they grow up. They've spent so much time learning the hard skills in their area, or let's face it, more often chosen for them, area of expertise, instead of the soft skills that will project them through the rest of their life. People who train all their life in one area only see things through that lens. If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. People who have one career for a bit and then transition to another bring with them all of the skills and expertise that those in the current career cannot see. That's what I want to see in the future. People changing their careers every 20 years to keep things fresh, expanding their horizon, learning new things. I don't think women belong just in the home or in the kitchen. I want to see them become part of the workforce, and I want to see them not be treated badly and told that they are somehow deficient because they don't want a child. We should have gotten way past that point. It's why of the few politicians I don't actively despise, and we're talking single digits here, all of them had a previous career before entering politics. That's the way it should be. You should go into politics because you see a problem you want to fix and you have the solution to fix said problem. Right now we're plagued by career politicians who have never worked a real job in their life and have no concept of what the problem even is, much less how to tackle it. These people spend their whole life in politics, and the only changes they bring about are for the worse and for their own personal gain. With the exponential growth in technology and the rapid changes our society are facing, no one really knows what they are doing or what tomorrow may bring. One of the biggest falsehoods I ever believed as a child was that adults had their lives in order. In reality, no one knows what the hell they are doing. Mastery of one type of warfare is perfected just in time for it to change completely. One generation figures out the best way to live, only for the next generation's life to be completely different. In 1648, Axel Oxenstierna wrote to his son, a delegate to the negotiations that would lead to the Peace of Westphalia, who worried about his ability to hold his own amidst experienced and eminent statesmen and diplomats. He said, "Do you not know, my son, with how very little wisdom the world is governed? Nothing has changed since then. For all our supposed civilization and technology, we are still just monkeys in shoes. We expect people to decide as teenagers what career they want to choose for the rest of their life at a time when they have no concept of the wider world. The adults of the world are children in the cosmic scheme of things, and the actual children are babies, being given outdated or straight up wrong guidance. The silver tsunami is coming if we don't find a way to stop it. Longevity research is not only a solution to that, but the first step of many into creating a world way better than the one we have. It's taken me over a quarter century to finally come to terms with myself and my psyche, and to know the path I want to pursue. I don't have the solution to most of life's problems, but maybe when I'm 100 I might. I would like to be in a position at that point to implement them. You see, I don't want the first 65 years of life to be considered one's working life. I want it to be considered the tutorial, only the start into what you can become and what you can accomplish.